back. In this video, I'm going to show you how to manage your Google Calendar settings. This is pretty important because your Google Calendar as a whole can be either public or private. And then each event can also be either public or private. And a lot of times folks don't realize that they have a public Google Calendar. And what that ends up meaning is that anyone in the organization can pull up your calendar and see all the event details. So imagine that you have an event like, I'm going to have a parent conference with Cowboys parents. And in the event details, it says parent conference with Cowboys parents. Well, you have just broadcasted that like private information to everyone in your organization, which is not great. But if your calendar is private, that event will just say that you're busy unless you have chosen to share that event's details intentionally with a particular person or in general for that particular event. So this is an important thing to pay attention to that a lot of people don't realize they need to pay attention to. So just like with all the other Google apps, I'm going to manage my settings by coming up to this gear icon in the top right. And you notice a whole bunch of options here down the left. A lot of them are things you probably don't need to pay attention to unless you really want to, like the language and the country and how you want your dates and times formatted. Like if Vanessa Costa really wants her dates to have a European formatting, she can do that if she feels like it. Your time zone, whether or not you want to show the world clock, these are all just kind of personal preference things. Sometimes it's nice to have the event settings change, like my event settings default to 60 minutes, but that might not work for you and you have the flexibility to change that. The speedy meetings is kind of nice too. It automatically will end meetings a little bit early so that you can like have crossover time. So if you're using your Google Calendar to manage parent conferences or something and you want to make sure that you don't have back-to-back meetings with no break in between, that can help. And then this is where things kind of start to get more interesting. Default guest permissions. So when you create an event, which I'll show you how to do another time, you can invite guests. And you always, when you create the event, have the option of modifying these permissions. You can customize it per event, but you can also decide what you want it to be by default. Do you want guests to be able to invite others or see the whole list of guests, or do you want them to only know that they're invited to that event? Whether you want it to show weekends and things like that, whether you want it to start the week on Sunday or Monday or Saturday, and all these kinds of things. I really like this automatically add events from Gmail. I'd like to have that turned on. In a future video, when I talk about Gmail, I'll show you how you can manage your calendar within Gmail, but this is kind of nice because if someone sends you an email and says, hey, can we meet Thursday, November 3rd at 10 o'clock, it's going to kind of put that in your calendar for you automatically. This working hours thing is also kind of important. This is about your free busy time, and I'll talk more about that in a future video. But Google Calendar has a feature where it will find a common time with a group of people that you've invited to an event and suggest it as a meeting time. And your working hours is kind of the window that it's going to look within. This is especially important if you're a part-time teacher or if you're somebody like an OT who goes between schools. You might want to set your working hours for each school you go to be just when you're at that school. And that's going to help you communicate with people about when you're available to meet. All right, so that's all the general settings. Then you can go to settings for your individual calendars. There's some other stuff here too, like adding calendars. I'll show you more about this later. That's not really what I want to focus on for this video. But if I go to an individual calendar, everyone has a calendar that's like their name. Basically, that's like the default calendar that you start with. And this is what I'm talking about with your permissions. I definitely don't want to make my calendar available to the public. That's going to mean everybody in the whole world can find it by putting in my email address, whether they work for Woods or not. And I definitely don't want to make it public and then have see all event details on, because that's just putting way too much information out into the world. I do want my calendar, or this calendar especially, to be available for Woods Charter School, but I only want people to be able to see my free busy time. I don't want everyone at Woods Charter to be able to see my event details. I might put an event in there that I need to leave early this day to go to the doctor, and everybody just doesn't need to know that. So this is definitely the setting I recommend for really all of your calendars, unless you're kind of sharing a classroom calendar or something with parents. You can share your calendar with specific people. This particular calendar, kind of your default calendar, is probably not one that you're going to share, unless at home my husband and I might share ours with each other, but you always have that option. And then there's again some settings here that are just kind of up to your personal preference, like whether you want notifications when you have an event coming and how soon do you want a notification and that kind of thing. And then when you want to embed a calendar, which I'll show you how to do in more detail in a future video, this is the embed code that you would want to use. And this iframe part at the beginning here, that's always a good sign that something is something you can embed. That kind of gives you a nice clean window within a website that will display the thing nicely. So this is also if you wanted to import your Google Calendar into iCalendar or into one of the Microsoft calendaring softwares or something, this is where you can get those web addresses to use. And you can use those even if your calendar is not public. Another thing I'll mention briefly is you see a lot of calendars here that have the I with the thing crossed out. Those are calendars that instead of Xing and getting rid of, I hid. So I could come back in here and essentially unhide them. I couldn't tell you now exactly why I hid those at the time, but sometimes if I have a classroom calendar and I know it kind of will show the pacing that I used that year, I might hide it instead of deleting it, so that way I can return to it if I want to and review that pacing. But I don't want it to be showing up in that sidebar every time I access my calendar, getting in my way. So those are your calendar settings. Just to review quickly, the most important setting, in my opinion, is this one under access permissions. And make sure that unless you have a good reason, your calendar is available within Woods Charter and people can only see your free busy times instead of seeing calendar details. And you can see that that's true. You have the same features on all of these other calendars too, where you can decide what you want them to look like and how much you want them to share with people. So that's it. Next video, I will show you how to create an event.